What do taxes and communication have in common? Well, often it's frequent misunderstandings and custom definitions. Now, what exactly does that mean? That means that words like in the tax code, as in our communication, often have what I would call custom definitions. Now, it's not that we all have our own dictionary and every word means what it means because we want it to mean what we want it to mean. No, that's not what it means at all. What it means is people perceive each word a little bit differently based on a few things, and we're going to cover that in this video. So the first factor when it comes to understanding custom definitions in your communications is people understand their words based on their experiences. So for example, if you grew up, right, and in your life you had, let's say you had a bad experience, let's say with the word discipline, let's say when you were young, your parents, who let's say were overly aggressive, said, oh, you did something, you slipped up a little bit, and so now you're going to get disciplined. And what that meant actually to them was that you're going to get, a whooping, or maybe they might have even, beaten you a little bit excessively. So now, as an adult, when you hear the word discipline, when someone speaks to you about having discipline, the first image that comes to your mind are those, memories of when you messed up and you were severely disciplined, corrected, or beaten in an extreme case, right? But let's say we're talking about being disciplined. You want to achieve a goal. You have a vision that you want to, for your life that you want to achieve. Well, you have to have discipline. And here's what discipline actually means. And this is the universal definition that I like to give you, because oftentimes we hear definitions that are, halfway definitions, or I feel like oftentimes the definition of discipline is incomplete. We only hear half of the story. And so discipline, what it actually means is doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done with excellence, even if you don't feel like doing it and nobody's watching, while also having the self-control to not do anything that's going to throw you off course of your vision or the dream that you have for your life, right? The vision you have for your life. Now that's discipline, right? It's much different. It's not saying, or another perspective might be, oh, discipline means I have to do what I hate doing to get where I want to go. And that can be one perspective. But like Mike Tyson said one time, discipline is doing things that you don't like as if you like them, because the vision you have is that much more valuable to you than the temporary pain of not doing what you have to do, even if you don't want to, and not doing what you shouldn't be doing that might throw you off course, right? So that's an example of having a custom definition that, when you're speaking with people, you have to understand that even though you might say something and you might say something very clear and very precise, but that word still might mean something. It might carry a burden. It might carry some history in that person's life experience that, might alter the way they perceive what you're saying. And so it's important to get feedback, and we'll talk about that in a second. So the first factor that influences misunderstandings and custom definitions, in quotations if you will, is people perceive words through their past experiences, right? So that's the first thing you got to understand. And in communication, it's something that's very important that is often not spoken of, is taking time to actually read the person you're speaking to, or the audience you're speaking to. You have to be able to observe their body language, observe their facial expressions, observe their mouth in case it seems like they want to say something, or they have some feedback, or they have a question. These are all important factors when it comes to communication. And so what that does is that's going to help you, because what happens is in your communication, you have an intent with your words, right? And if the response or the reaction that the person has it seems out of cue and not in accordance with what you were expecting, or what the result, or how it would be if it was appropriately interpreted, then you have time to say, wait, let me take a pause and find out what's really going on, find out what happened, and make sure that you are clearly understood by the person listening. So the first factor when it comes to misunderstandings and custom definitions, that I like to say again, is people perceive words from their past experiences. The second factor when it comes to communication and misunderstandings is people perceive words based on the environment they grew up and even their current environment. So again, so let's say you grew up. So the second factor when it comes to misunderstandings and where people perceive their definitions and perceive words from is their past experiences, right? So let's say, for example, you grew up in a place where, there was a lot of poverty. And so oftentimes what happens is, if you grew up in an environment like that, the word rich to you is often going to have a negative connotation. Why? Because, the societal programming mechanism has taught you to believe that rich people are evil. So you think that the only way to get rich is by being evil. So you don't subconsciously, you have an aversion to wealth and to getting rich, because you think, well, only wicked people are rich, right? You don't have an environment that is conducive to creating wealth, because all the people that you know who had money, not really rich, but who you perceived as being rich, or who you perceived as being successful or having money, the majority were either drug dealers, or they were people who were doing illegal things, or who got their money by, dishonest means. And so to you, that environment says to you that the word rich, the definition of rich, is an evil person who has taken somebody else's wealth or work, right, or money. Whereas if you grow up in an environment that has a history, come from a family who is maybe well-to-do, or who has had some sort of financial education, right, some sort of financial literacy, then you understand that the word rich is providing value. The reason you get rich is because you've provided a value to the marketplace to the extent that you've gained enough value in exchange for what you've given, that you are now wealthy, you are rich, you are prosperous, right? But again, if your environment, you come from an environment of lack and scarcity and poverty, your association that you're going to have when you hear the word rich, subconsciously that's going to put up, it's going to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. You're going to be, without knowing it, you're going to avoid or not want to get in that conversation, and you're going to actually distrust of people who speak to you about things of getting wealth and becoming rich. Why? Because your environment that you grew up in, and maybe even your current environment, have influenced you, and obviously the societal programming mechanism has taught you to believe that rich people are evil. So misunderstandings often come from that as well. So you have to make sure that when you see in your communication that someone reacted or responded in a way that you don't really believe is aligned with what you were trying to communicate, you want to find out what happened there, because oftentimes they might have a different perception of the word that you said, or a custom definition, which is what we're going to call, the personal perception of the word based on their experiences and based on their environment. Right. So the third factor from which a person perceives the words or the definitions that you're communicating with them, in the words that you're communicating with them, is their education, right? So here's the thing, and when I'm talking about education, I'm not talking about going to college or anything like that. I'm talking about education is personal development. It's growing, it's understanding, it's adding knowledge to yourself so that you can be more valuable, right? It's not about getting a piece of paper that says you studied all this stuff. No, it's about personal development, personal growth, right? Because the more, this is a principle that I've learned a long time ago, is that the more value you add to your life through gaining knowledge, experience, and skills, the more valuable you are to the community, to the marketplace, right? And so because you provide that value, you can then receive a value in exchange for that. So based on people's experience and education, what they've brought themselves up believing around whatever the word is, and there's this concept, and this, let's say for example, wealth that we were just talking about. If let's say you came from a place of poverty, let's say you came around from scarcity your whole life, let's say you grew up in the neighborhood, you say you grew up in the hood, you grew up in the ghetto or whatever, or you just came from a place of a lot of lack. Well, you have the decision, you could have made the decision that you're going to educate yourself in the area of financial literacy. That don't mean you're going to go get an MBA in finance. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you're going to read books. You're going to expose yourself to people who have wealth, people who understand how money works. You're going to expose yourself. You're going to study people who have come from the same places you have, abject poverty, and who are now in prosperity to a point where they can't even, they have to weigh the money, where they can't count it anymore. And it's all about personal development. When I talk about education here, I'm talking about the time you take and the time you've put in to learn about how money works, and how you can become prosperous, how you can really grow in a lot of areas. Because another thing to understand about education is that I believe we as humans exist on three planes, what I call the three planes of existence: your spirit, your soul, and your physical, right? And so on these three planes of existence, you have to make the determination to grow, and people perceive your communications based on their level of education. So again, when you're having a conversation with someone and you see that their reaction or their response doesn't quite align with what you were trying to communicate, in other words, if it seems like they take offense to something you said that had no offense attached to it, then, take a pause and say, hey, what's going on? What did you understand? And so now that you understand the three places from which a person perceives the communication that you're speaking to them with, the words you're using, now let's talk about how you can avoid misunderstandings, right? The first thing is you want to understand you have to formulate what you're going to say, right? And what I mean by this is you want to use precise, concise words as often as you can. You want to leave as little margin of error of interpretation as you can. Now, granted, even if you're the best communicator, there's still going to be, again, because of the past experiences, because of the past environment, because of the past education from which they are coming, there's still a chance and even maybe a likelihood that the person you are speaking with might receive what you're saying in a way that's not meant, that you did not mean. So you have to formulate precise communications, use concise words, and then even so, you still, we're going to talk about in a second, get feedback from them to make sure that they are receiving what you are intending to communicate, right? So the first solution to avoiding misunderstandings in communications is, formulate precise, concise communication, okay? The second factor in avoiding misunderstandings or minimizing, more accurately, misunderstandings is use few words. Now, one of the key principles in effective and efficient communication is that keyword efficient, right? And what is efficient? Efficient means using the minimum input necessary to get the optimum output, right? So here's what that means. You want to use the least amount of words that you need to communicate clearly what you are trying to say. Now, that doesn't mean, so don't go to the far end of the pool and use just a few words without being clear, because here's the thing, and nothing becomes clear until nothing becomes dynamic until it becomes clear, right? So you have to communicate in a way with using few words, and here's the thing, here's a tip to know how to use few words in your communication. Think about, and you can check a video I have called Painting with Words. Think about the words intensity, right? And the words brevity. Because what you're going to do is you're going to use specific words that are the most intense words to express what you're wanting to communicate. Why? Because there's less likelihood that word is going to be misunderstood. And so even in that margin of error that still could exist, it's very unlikely that they'll misunderstand it because you're so intense and precise with the word. And another thing with that also falls into the area of effective communication, because we as humans, we make decisions based on emotion, but we justify based on logic, right? And I said it again, we as humans, we make decisions based on emotion, but then we justify by logic, right? And so it's important that you use intense words. Now, I'm not talking about being, exaggerating. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is find the word that is the most graphic, if you will, and not in the negative sense, but the one that is just the most descriptive, precise word that you want to use that conveys the idea you're trying to communicate, so you can use fewer words, because in effective and efficient communication, you only use the amount of words necessary to clearly communicate what you want to say without, leaving it incomplete, the message you want to say. So it's important that you use few words, also because people's attention span is not what it used to be. And unless you are dynamic, which you can learn to be dynamic, you can use fluctuation in your tones, you can use fluctuation in speed, you can use pauses. There's a lot of other things, that what I call the non-verbals in communication, that you can use to increase the effectiveness and the efficiency of your communication. But using few words and teaching yourself to use fewer words is going to teach you to use the most precise word possible for what you're trying to communicate. So the second solution to minimizing misunderstandings in your communication is using few words. And again, I would recommend that you watch the video on my YouTube called How to Paint with Words. And then the third factor with which you can use to minimize misunderstandings is feedback. Always ask for feedback. And this is important because effective and efficient communication is more work than just talking and flapping your lips. It's more work, but it's also more rewarding, because you make sure that what you're saying, that what you want to communicate, is what was received. Because oftentimes, again, because of people's perceptions from their past might put a shadow on what you're wanting to communicate, and you don't want to do that. So you want to get feedback. Again, like I was mentioning earlier, if you're saying something and you see that in the person's face they were somewhat offended, or there's clearly some sort of misunderstanding that isn't aligned, or a reaction that isn't in line with what you meant to say. So you'll pause, you'll stop and say, so what do you think about that? Or what are your thoughts? Something along those lines, to where you can get feedback so that you can see what the other person understood, so that you can either clarify or affirm that is exactly what you wanted to communicate. So folks, this has been a quick video, well, a little bit longer than I was expecting, but these are some principles that you can use to improve your communication. Now, real quick, I'll end this video on this, and the title of the video is, what does taxes and communication have in common? It's misunderstandings because of custom definitions, or as I used in these examples, the perceptions that people have when you speak to them. Just like the tax code, for example, the word in the tax code, business, actually means, in general, in its common use, the word business could be defined as, someone who is engaged in the exchange of values and in commerce. Whereas in the tax law specifically, it speaks of business and trade, talks about performing the functions of public office, i.e. a president, senator, judges, etc. And so just like people misunderstand in general when they're communicating with people, the reason so many people misunderstand the IRS and the application of the tax law is because they don't understand that the IRS has over 50 words with custom definitions, that if you don't know those custom definitions before reading some of that stuff, you're going to be completely lost and confused, thinking that it means one thing when it really means the other. So folks, I hope this was helpful to you. Leave a comment below, like the video, or subscribe, and looking forward to helping you communicate more effectively and efficiently. Have a great day.